PSW Book Nooks presents R.L. Stine's Cheerleaders, The First Evil, an Archway paperback published by Pocket Books. Part 1. The Cheers. Chapter 1. The Evil Sister. "You are evil," Corgi said in a hushed whisper. "You are truly evil." The words made Bobby grin, her green eyes lighting up with pleasure. She gripped the rat tighter around its rib cage. "Where are you going to put it?" Corky asked, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The floorboards were cold beneath her bare feet. "Right in front of Sean's door?" Bobby nodded and tiptoed down the narrow hall toward their brother's room. Her blonde hair was still tangled from sleep. Both girls were in long cotton nightgowns. "Sean is terrified of rats," Corky whispered, her eyes on her little brother's door, expecting him to burst out and ruin Bobby's little surprise. "I know," Bobby said in an evil snicker. She carefully set the rat down in the center of the doorway. When Sean came out for breakfast, he'd have to walk right into it. "It looks so real," Corky whispered. "It doesn't look like rubber." The floor creaked noisily and Corky stopped. She set one hand against the peeling wallpaper and leaned on it. "It's the hair that makes it," Bobby replied. Having set down the realistic-looking creature, she and her sister started to back away, their eyes on Sean's closed door. "It's very good rat hair, very authentic." "Girls, what are you doing?" Their mother's voice interrupted them from downstairs, startling them both. "Are you dressed yet? We're going to be late. Come down for breakfast. Oh, and make sure Sean is up." "Don't worry," Bobby whispered, grinning at her sister. "Sean will be wide awake real soon." Chuckling about Bobby's little joke, both girls descended the creaking staircase and joined their parents in the kitchen. Mr. Cochran, their handsome, young-looking father, was already at the table, wiping eggs off his chin with a paper napkin. "Yuck, not poached eggs again," Bobby groaned. Mrs. Cochran turned around, a pale reflection of her vibrant blonde daughters. She stared at their nightshirts, frowning. "That's how you're going to go to school?" "Yeah," Bobby answered quickly. "All the girls are wearing nightshirts. It's sort of a trend." "Why do we have to have poached eggs?" Corky asked, pouring herself a half glass of orange juice. "You need a lot of energy," their mother replied, dumping 2 runny eggs in 2 pieces of toast with a plastic spatula. Mr. Cochran yawned loudly. "I don't sleep well in this house." "No one does," Corky muttered, taking her place at the breakfast table. The 2 eggs on her plate stared up at her like giant, runny eyes. "It's the ghosts." "Yeah, this place is definitely haunted," Bobby quickly agreed. "Haunted? That's ridiculous." Mrs. Cochran set down a plate in front of Bobby, who made a disgusted face. "This girl I met at school, Lisa Bloom, she told me that all the houses on Fear Street are haunted," Corky said, poking her eggs with her fork, watching the yellow run over the toast. "Just because a house is old and creaky, it doesn't mean it's haunted," Mr. Cochran replied. "I think someone was murdered in my room," Bobby said, glancing across the table at her sister. Bobby was the one with the wild imagination. "Someone keeps whispering at me late at night, whispering and crying." "Probably the wind," their father said, straightening his tie with one hand and taking a sip from his coffee cup with the other. "Yeah, sure, the wind," Bobby said sarcastically. Sitting across from each other, Corky and Bobby looked like twins. Even though Bobby was a year older, both had blonde hair, very light, very fine, which they wore brushed straight to their shoulders or sometimes in ponytails or single braids. Both had lively green eyes, creamy pale skin, and high cheekbones like models. Bobby was 17, but nearly 2 inches shorter than her younger sister, which annoyed her to no end. Corky, on the other hand, was envious of her sister's figure. Corky was tall but boyish. Sometimes she felt gawky and wished she'd hurry up and fill out. "Well, your brother certainly isn't having any trouble sleeping in this house," Miss Cochran said, heading toward the front stairs. "Didn't you wake him up?" They heard a deafening scream, a hideous scream of terror from upstairs. Sean had obviously discovered the rat. "I think he's up," Bobby said dryly. Both girls collapsed in laughter, lowering their heads to the table. "What did you two do?" Miss Cochran demanded. She hurried to the rescue. "We didn't do it. The ghost did it," Bobby called after her. Mr. Cochran simply shook his head. He was too used to having his daughters play tricks on Sean. They loved to take advantage of their brother's trusting personality. Taking another sip of coffee, Mr. Cochran sighed, wondering what hideous thing they had just done to make poor Sean scream like that. The girls were still snickering when Sean entered the kitchen, fully dressed in faded jeans and a red Gap t-shirt, swinging the rat by its tail. "It didn't fool me at all," he told his sisters. "You always scream like that when you get up, right?" Bobby teased. "I just did that so you wouldn't be disappointed," Sean said, avoiding their eyes. Mrs. Cochran followed him into the kitchen and rested her hands on his slender shoulders. "This house is creepy enough," she scolded the girls. "Do you really need rats?" Sean set the rat down on the breakfast table. Mrs. Cochran quickly grabbed it away. "Not on the table, please." "It's not as disgusting as these eggs," Bobby griped. Sean glanced from one plate to another. "Looks like rat puke." "Sean, please!" his mother exclaimed. "Another delightful Cochran family breakfast," their father said, pulling himself up and scraping his chair noisily back along the faded old linoleum. "Have your breakfast," Mrs. Cochran told the girls, glancing at the clock. "Don't you have cheerleading tryouts this afternoon?" "If they'll let us try out," Corky said glumly. The light in her emerald eyes faded. "The squad is already full. They say they picked everyone last spring before we moved here." "But you girls are the best," their mother declared, plopping 2 eggs on the plate for Sean. "You were both all-state back in Missouri. You practically took your squad to national championship." "You both stink," Sean said flatly. "No one asked your opinion," Mr. Cochran told Sean. "Hey, I'm out of here." He gave his wife a quick kiss on the cheek and disappeared out the kitchen door. "Good luck this afternoon, girls," they heard him call from outside. "We'll need it," Corky muttered. "When you jump up, everyone can see under your pants," Sean said nastily. "Sean, eat your eggs," Miss Cochran replied sharply. She pushed the plate closer to him, then glanced down at the girls, concern wrinkling her pale face. "They should let you try out. When they see how good you are." Miss Green said it was up to the girls on the squad, Corky said. "Who's this Miss Green? The advisor?" their mother asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Yeah, we met her and we met the squad again, Jennifer something or other," Bobby said. "She seemed really nice." "So they'll let you try out?" Miss Cochran asked, motioning for Sean to eat faster. "Maybe," Corky said doubtfully. "We'll see after school," Bobby said. She took a final bite of toast, pushed her chair back, and hurried upstairs to get dressed. "You two could put Shadyside high on the map," Miss Cochran yelled after her. Corky laughed. "Mom, if it were up to you, we'd have it all made." "But you stink," Sean said quietly. Then he opened his mouth wide so Corky could see the yellow egg inside. "You're gross," Corky said, frowning. "You stink," he replied. It seemed to be the refrain of the morning. "Knock it off," their mother scolded, rolling her eyes. "Hurry, get dressed. We're all going to be late." Corky took a last sip of orange juice, then headed upstairs trying to decide what to wear. The kids at Shadyside were a lot more into clothing than her friends back in Missouri. She had the feeling that she'd need some new things. Some short skirts, some tights, some leggings. "Oh!" She stopped at the landing and stared up at the hall railing. It took her a while to realize that she was staring at her sister. "Bobby!" she called. Bobby was dangling over the wooden railing, motionless, her arms hanging down, her eyes wide open in an unseeing stare, her mouth twisted in a wide O of horror. "Bobby!" Corky repeated, calling in a shrill voice she didn't recognize. "Bobby!" But her sister didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Chapter 2. Nervous Time. "Bobby!" Her heart in her throat, Corky lurched up the final stairs to her sister. Bobby raised her head, blinked, and an amused smile formed on her face. "Gotcha," she said softly, pushing with both hands against the railing. She raised herself to a standing position. "Bobby, you rat!" Corky cried, her heart still thudding. "You weren't supposed to find me," Bobby said, still grinning delightedly that her little joke had worked so well. Sean was supposed to come up the stairs first. Don't ever do that again, Corky cried, giving her sister a playful but hard punch on the shoulder. You know I'm nervous about this house and trying out for cheerleading and everything. Nervous? Said Bobby, following her sister into the room they shared. Come on, Cork, lighten up. I mean, what's there to be nervous about? Her friends at Shadyside High were always telling Jennifer Daly that she looked like the movie star Julia Roberts. In fact, Jennifer did have the actress's large dark eyes and sensual full lips. She was also tall and slender and moved with an easy grace. A friendly girl with a soft voice and high, tinkling laugh, Jennifer had been the popular choice for captain of Shadyside High Tigers' cheerleading squad. She and Kimmy Bass, the squad's energetic assistant captain, had been good friends since elementary school. But Jennifer also got along well with the other cheerleaders. She was easy to know and to like, and as Kimmy put it, she isn't stuck up about anything. Kimmy buzzed around Jennifer like a frenetic bumblebee. With her round face topped by a mop of crumpled black hair, her full cheeks that always seemed to be pink, and her slightly chunky shape, she proved a striking contrast to her friend. Their personalities were quite different, too. While Jennifer was soft-spoken, serene, and graceful, Kimmy was loud, enthusiastic, and so full of energy that she seemed unable to stand still. Standing under the basketball backboard, Jennifer straightened her t-shirt over her gray sweatpants and waited for the other members of the squad to enter the gym. She glanced up at the big clock next to the scoreboard. 3:20. School had just let out. Time for cheerleading practice to begin. Kimmy was next to arrive, the swinging double doors banging behind her as she hurried across the gym floor, waving to Jennifer. The bright overhead lights gave Kimmy's face a greenish tinge, Jennifer noticed, and as Kimmy drew closer, Jennifer saw that she had tiny beads of perspiration above her upper lip, a sure sign that Kimmy was worked up about something. Jennifer didn't have to guess what Kimmy was upset about. It had to be the two Corcoran sisters, who, Jennifer noticed, had slipped into the gym and were huddled together on the far side of the floor near a section of wood bleachers that had been lowered during the last gym class. I just don't think it's right, Kimmy exclaimed, tossing her paper back to the floor, her round cheeks pink with excitement. We already have our squad, Jennifer. We've practiced all summer. They can't just barge in. I don't care who they are. Jennifer closed her eyes briefly. Evidently, Kimmy didn't realize how far her voice could travel in the big, empty gym, or perhaps she didn't care. But she was talking loud enough for the Cochran sisters to overhear every word. Shh! Jennifer whispered, gesturing with her eyes to the bleachers. Kimmy turned quickly, following Jennifer's gaze. I don't care, she repeated, just as loudly as before. She shook her mop of hair as if shaking away Jennifer's warning. We just can't let them try out, Jen. We can't. It just isn't fair. The other cheerleaders were filing into the gym now, dropping their books and backpacks beside the wall, greeting one another in low tones, leaning against the tile wall to stretch out. Kimmy's friend, Deborah Kern, entered and gave Kimmy a quick wave. She was followed by Heather Deal and Megan Carmen, who were best friends and always together. Entering last was Veronica, Ronnie, Mitchell, the only freshman to make the squad. Kimmy, they can hear you, Jennifer repeated, embarrassed. She turned to the bleachers where the Cochrans were now sitting side by side on the bottom bench, their hands clasped tensely in their laps. You know they're supposed to be terrific cheerleaders. Says who? Kimmy snapped, crossing her arms in front of her chest. They were all state back in their old hometown, Jennifer told her. And you know that cheerleading competition that's on ESPN every year? Yeah, we watch it together, remember? Kimmy said almost grudgingly. Well, their cheerleading team won it last year. That's how good the Cochrans are. But who cares, Jen? Kimmy cried emotionally, uncrossing her arms and gesturing with her hands. We have a great team, don't we? We work together so well. We've practiced together for so long and... But maybe they can make our team even better, Jennifer said, refusing to raise her voice. After all, we want the very best girls we can get, don't we? I mean, maybe we could be All-State this year or be on ESPN or something. I agree with Kimmy. Deborah broke in, stepping up beside her friend. She was beautiful, but cold-looking, with straight blonde hair cut very short and icy blue eyes. Deborah was an unlikely cheerleader, short and thin, almost too thin. She seldom smiled. The only time she ever really seemed to come alive was when she was performing a cheer or a routine. "Look at them," Jennifer said softly, turning her eyes to Corky and Bobby. "They're here. We can at least let them do their stuff, don't you think? It won't hurt to watch them." "But we had tryouts last spring," Kimmy insisted. "Yeah," Deborah chimed in. "We can't hold tryouts every week, you know." She fixed Jennifer with an icy stare.
"Is this a cheerleading squad or a debating team?"
A harsh voice rang out loudly. All of the cheerleaders turned to see Miss Green, their advisor, step quickly from her small office in the corner and move toward them in long, quick strides. Dressed in tight white tennis shorts, a gray short-sleeved t-shirt, and black high tops, Miss Green was a compact woman with frizzy brown hair, a plain face that naturally seemed to fall into an angry expression, and a husky voice that always sounded as if she had a bad case of laryngitis. She taught health and phys ed, and had a reputation for being tough. A well-deserved reputation.
"We have 3 new routines to learn by Friday night,"
she called out loudly, her voice echoing off the tile walls of the vast gym.
"So what's holding things up? Or have you learned the new routines already?"
"We're trying to decide about them," Kimmy said, glancing first at Jennifer, then pointing to the Corcoran sisters, who had climbed to their feet.
"It's up to Jennifer," Miss Green said, staring at Jennifer. "The captain decides."
Kimmy, obviously miffed, made a face. "I'd like to see what they can do," Jennifer said, staring defiantly at Kimmy. "I really think we should give them a chance."
"Okay, end of debate,"
Miss Green said briskly. She waved to Corky and Bobby.
"Okay, you two," she shouted. "You're on!"
"I don't believe this," Kimmy muttered darkly to Deborah as they went to join the other girls against the wall. They stood beside Ronnie, and the 3 girls whispered among themselves, their expressions unhappy, as Corky and Bobby made their way across the gym. "Are you nervous?" Corky whispered to Bobby, her eyes on the cheerleaders huddled against the wall. "Who, me?" Bobby replied, with a peal of nervous laughter. "Come on, why would we be nervous, Cork? We know we're good." "Tell that to my shaking knees," Corky exclaimed. Their sneakers squeaked as they hurried across the gleaming wood floor. The gym suddenly grew silent. The air felt heavy and hot. "Show us whatever you like," Jennifer told them, flashing them an encouraging smile. Bobby and Corky each took a deep breath, glanced at each other for luck, stepped to the center of the floor, and huddled together. "What should we do first?" Corky asked her older sister. "Let's start with some synchronized walkovers," Bobby suggested. "Then let's show them our double cartwheel." "Why are they staring at us like that?" Corky asked, glancing over Bobby's shoulder at the silent cheerleaders. "Like they hate us or something." "Let's give them something to stare at," Bobby replied, grinning. "Break a leg," Corky said. Chapter 3. First Scream.
"Oh!"
The cry from one of the cheerleaders told Bobby that her spread eagle was as spectacular as she had planned. Up, up, she leapt until she felt as if she could take off and fly, and then she shot out both legs, rising them up until they were perfectly straight. And then, in her most startling move, Bobby kept her legs outstretched as she gracefully floated down, hands high above her head like a diving bird, into a perfect split. Then, before her stunned audience had recovered, she and Corky were into a powerhouse chant.
First and 10, do it again! First and 10, do it again! Go Tigers!
It's going okay, Bobby thought. At least they're not glaring at us anymore. She glanced at her sister, gave her a quick nod, their signal for their big finish, and jumped. On Corky's back, a perfect pony mount. Then, one swift move. Up, arms up, and up again. Into the shoulder stand they had practiced day after day until their shoulders and backs were red and sore. Good, Bobby thought, standing straight and tall on Corky's shoulders, feeling Corky's hot hands lock onto the back of her legs. She smiled confidently, hands on hips. Then, without losing her smile, she suddenly dived off Corky's shoulders. The cheerleaders gasped as she plummeted straight out. She completed a perfect flip and landed standing on both feet, and then the sisters moved into a repeat of their double cartwheel. Corky grasped Bobby's ankles, and Bobby grasped Corky's ankles, and the two girls rolled across the floor. They stood up with a final shout,
Go Tigers!
The two sisters ran off clapping. Bobby smiled at Corky as they leaned against the wall, catching their breath. Wow, they're incredible! She heard one of the cheerleaders exclaim. How'd they do that? She heard another ask in a loud whisper. You're putting on weight, Corky grumbled, rubbing her shoulders. Wow, that was great, Jennifer said, smiling warmly, her dark eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. Thanks, Corky and Bobby said in unison, smiling back at her. They were standing awkwardly in Miss Green's office, a small glass-den enclosure in the corner of the gym. Seated at the wooden desk, Miss Green was searching the top drawer for some forms. The routine had been one of their best ever, Bobby thought. Sometimes she and Corky just clicked, and that day had been one of those days. All of the cheerleaders had been really excited and impressed, except for the one named Kimmy and her short blonde friend. They had remained stone-faced, even when all the other girls had burst into appreciative applause. That was fabulous, Miss Green had called out in her husky voice. Of course, your shoulder dives are impressive, but I'd also like the height you got on those spread eagles. She turned to the squad members along the wall. I'd like to see everyone work on the new routines. Now, I hope Bobby and Corky have inspired you to keep your energy up. Up! Let's go! Kimmy had yelled, clapping and running past Corky and Bobby, avoiding their eyes as she led the squad to the center of the floor. As the girls started to chant one of their new cheers, the two sisters had followed Jennifer and Miss Green into the corner office. Jennifer motioned for the two sisters to sit down on the folding chairs against the wall. Corky glanced quickly at Bobby as they sat, a questioning glance. Do you mean we made the team? Bobby asked Jennifer. Ah, here they are, Miss Green interrupted before Jennifer could reply. You'll need to fill out these forms. This one's a health form, she said, pulling out the green sheet of paper. And this one's a release form. Your parents are going to have to sign that one. We made the squad? Bobby repeated to Jennifer. Yeah, you were amazing, Jennifer gushed. Then she added, I used to be the star around here, but no one's going to notice me with you two around. Bobby couldn't decide if she was kidding or not. The girls reacted with embarrassed laughter. We'll show you how to do the shoulder dismount, Bobby offered. I think we can all learn something from you two, Miss Green added, shuffling through the sheaf of forms. Jennifer's eyes flared just then, and Bobby suddenly felt uncomfortable. Jennifer was making it clear that she was jealous of the Corcorans. Where did you get that double cartwheel thing after the dive? Jennifer asked, leaning back against the yellow-tiled wall. We sort of made it up, Corky told her. Some other girls were doing something like it at the state finals back in Missouri last year, Bobby added. And we kind of adapted it. I hope we can get to the state finals, Jennifer said wistfully. With these two on the squad, it's a lock, Miss Green said, smiling one of her rare smiles as she handed the forms to Corky and Bobby. As she stared at the girls, her expression changed to one of concern. Uniforms, she muttered. This might be a problem. Quick! She pulled a pad of paper from her top drawer. Write down your sizes. This will have to be a rush order. A short while later, Bobby and Corky were thanking Jennifer and Miss Green. With the chants of their fellow cheerleaders ringing through the gym, they hurried out of the building, eager to congratulate each other. Jennifer and Miss Green continued to confer over the low wooden desk, their expressions serious, concerned. Miss Green spoke heatedly, her eyes turning occasionally to watch the practice on the other side of the glass partition. The squad is supposed to be 6, she told Jennifer. I suppose we can squeeze one more girl on, but not 2. We don't have the funds for 8 cheerleaders. Lowering their voices, Jennifer and Miss Green continued to discuss the problem. Hey, what's going on? Startled by the intrusion, both the captain and advisor whirled around to see Kimmy standing in the doorway, hands on hips, her cheeks pink, breathing heavily.
Can you ask Ronnie to come in? Jennifer asked Kimmy. We can only make room for one more girl, so Ronnie will have to. Huh? You're putting those sisters on the squad? Kimmy demanded, her voice rising several octaves. Of course, Jennifer replied. You saw how good they were. They're awesome. But I thought... Kimmy stopped, letting the news sink in. We're very lucky that they moved to Shadyside, Miss Green added, with unusual enthusiasm. And that means Ronnie's out? Kimmy asked, her voice revealing her outrage. She's off the squad? Just like that? Kimmy, Jennifer started, but Miss Green took over, climbing to her feet as if prepared to fight. Ronnie is only a freshman, she said firmly. She'll be an alternate. She'll practice with the squad. She'll go on, and if one of you gets sick or something... Oh, she'll love that, Kimmy said bitterly. I really don't think it's fair. I mean... Kimmy, you saw how good Bobby and Corky are, Jennifer cried. We need them. We really do. Kimmy started to reply, thought better of it, and uttered a sigh of exasperation. Glaring at Jennifer, she turned away from the office and called to Ronnie. You wanted to see me? Ronnie hesitated in the doorway, nervously pushing back her curly red hair with both hands. She had small brown eyes, a tiny round stub of a nose, and a face full of freckles. She almost collapsed when Miss Green told her of her demotion. Angry tears formed in the corners of her eyes, which she quickly wiped away with the backs of her hands. We really don't have a choice, Jennifer said softly. Yes, you do, Ronnie snapped back, her dark eyes flashing. We have to think of what's best for the squad, Miss Green said, twirling a pen nervously between her fingers. You'll have plenty of opportunity. Yeah, sure, Ronnie interrupted, and fled toward the locker room. She feels bad, Jennifer said, staring through the glass as the other girls stopped their practice to watch Ronnie run off. She'll get over it, Miss Green said flatly. I'll never forgive them, Ronnie cried. Never! Kimmy and Deborah huddled around the freshmen, trying to ignore the steamy, jungle-like air of the locker room. The other girls had showered and left. These three remained, talking, commiserating with one another, trying to decide what, if anything, they could do. Those sisters had no right to try out, Kimmy agreed heatedly, putting a comforting hand on Ronnie's shoulder. Not them, Ronnie insisted angrily. Jennifer and Miss Green, it was their idea to kick me off. We should all get together, Deborah said heatedly. You know, sign a petition or something. I'm sure Megan and Heather would sign it too. She sat down on the bench and began to pull off her sneakers. Kimmy removed a white towel from her locker and mopped her forehead with it. Wow, do I need a shower? Yeah, maybe you're right, Deb. If the whole squad protests, if we all stand together, I'll bet we get them to change their minds. Ronnie groaned and rolled her eyes. What dream world do you live in? She muttered. The Corcoran sisters were all stay, remember? Did you see the look on Miss Green's face when they did that shoulder stand and all those double cartwheels? She was practically drooling, Deborah said, shaking her head. She could probably see the championship trophy on her shelf. But what's Jennifer's problem? Kimmy demanded, pulling her heavy sweater over her head. She's your friend, Jennifer said bitterly. I can't believe her, Deborah added. Maybe being captain has gone to her head or something. She thinks she's such a big deal. My parents are going to be very upset, Ronnie said with renewed sadness. They were more excited about my making squad than I was, and now... Kimmy and Deborah continued trying to comfort Ronnie as they undressed, tossing their clothes onto the benches. They carried their towels over the concrete floor to the shower room. I don't want to be an alternate, Ronnie complained, her voice breaking with emotion. That's just stupid. I'd rather... If only the Corcorans would just go back where they came from, Deborah said. With their long blonde hair and their big eyes and phony smiles. She put a finger down her throat and pretended to puke. Yuck! They're not that bad, Ronnie muttered. It's Jennifer. She had no right. Kimmy stepped under the chrome shower head. She turned the knobs on the wall with both hands. The water burst out in a loud rush. Kimmy froze, open-mouthed, for a brief second. Then she started to scream.
Chapter 4. A Tragic Accident. Kimmy staggered back until she hit the towel wall. Panting loudly, she pointed to the water rushing in a broad stream from the shower head. "Kimmy, are you okay?" Deborah cried in alarm. "What is it?" "The water! It's scalding hot," Kimmy told her. The three girls turned off the taps and hurried out clutching their towels. "Ow! That burned!" Kimmy declared, starting to breathe normally. "Should we get the nurse? Are you all right?" Deborah asked, staring at Kimmy's chest and neck, which were scarlet. "I think I'll be okay," Kimmy said, relieved, covering herself with the towel. "It was just a shock." "We'll have to remember to tell Simmons," Deborah said, and then she added sarcastically, "Maybe he'll get around to fixing it in a year or two." Simmons was one of the Shadyside High custodians. He also drove a school bus, a laid-back young man with blonde ponytail and Walkman headphones that seemed to be permanently glued to his ears. He wasn't terribly reliable in either job. "Hey, did you drop this?" Ronnie asked. She bent down and picked something shiny off the floor. "Oh, thanks." Kimmy reached out for it. It was her silver megaphone pendant. Her parents had given it to her for her 16th birthday. She struggled to put it back around her neck, which was still red from the scalding shower. "The clasp is loose," she said, frowning. "I really have to get it fixed. Don't want to lose it." The three friends hurriedly got dressed in silence. Hoisting her backpack onto her shoulder, Ronnie sighed and headed for the door, her sneakers thudding heavily on the concrete. "Are you feeling any better?" Kimmy asked her. "No," was the sullen reply. "This is so exciting," Bobby declared. It was Friday evening 2 weeks later, and the cheerleaders were boarding the small yellow and black school bus that would take them to the Tigers' first away game. Corky followed her sister onto the bus. She said hi to Simmons, who was slouched in the driver's seat, fiddling with his ponytail. He grunted in reply. Raindrops dotted the windshield. A light rain had started to fall. The sky was a gloomy charcoal color, but not gloomy enough to darken the sisters' moods. They had been working hard for that night, practicing the new routines after school and at home, learning the cheers, working up a few new wrinkles of their own. "Go Tigers!" Bobby yelled, tumbling into a seat near the back. "Go who?" Megan yelled. The bus quickly filled with loud, excited voices, happy laughter. Simons leaned forward and pulled the handle to close the door. "Hey, where's Miss Green?" Deborah called. Jennifer turned around in her front seat. "She's driving her own car tonight. She had to take some friends." Kimmy sat in the window seat next to Deborah. She rubbed her hand over the glass, trying to clear the thin film of steam away so she could see out. "Hey, Simmons, how about some air conditioning?" one of the girls yelled. "We're melting back here." Simmons, obviously lost in his own thoughts, ignored the request as usual. He started the bus up and clicked on the headlights. Corky, seated in the aisle beside her sister, turned to stare out their window as the bus backed out of its parking space and headed out of the student parking lot. Rivulets of rainwater ran down the glass, distorting her view. The rain picked up, drumming noisily on the roof of the bus. A gust of wind blew water through the window, which was open an inch or two at the top. Bobby raised herself up and with great effort pushed the window shut. "Now we'll suffocate," Corky complained. "Take your pick, suffocation or drown," Bobby told her. "Tough choice," Corky replied. "Go Tigers!" someone yelled. Someone started a cheer, and everyone joined in.
"Tigers are yellow, tigers are black. Push 'em back, push 'em back, push 'em way back."
Bobby smiled at her sister. She settled back in her seat, happy and excited. The past 2 weeks had been difficult. The other girls were aloof at first, even resentful. But Bobby was confident that she and Corky had won most of them over.
Kimmy and Deborah were still cold to them, still acted as if they were unwanted intruders, but she felt sure that she and Corky would eventually win those two over too. As the bus rattled down Park Drive, away from the school, the rain pounded harder. The trees and shrubs exploded in a white flash of lightning. The thunder seemed to crack right above them. Heather and Megan began chanting, "Rain, rain, go away." Jennifer turned in her seat to face the rest of the cheerleaders. "It's not going to last," she announced. "It's just a flash storm. They said on the radio it's going to pass quickly." Another loud thunderclap made two girls scream. Everyone else laughed. The big wipers scraped noisily, rhythmically across the windshield, which was covered with a curtain of white steam. Simmons didn't seem to mind, or notice, the poor visibility. Holding onto the seat back, Jennifer stood up. "I have a few announcements to make," she called out, shouting to be heard over the driving rain. Kimmy and Deborah were giggling loudly about something. Jennifer waited for them to get quiet. "First of all, unless it's still drizzling, we'll do the fire baton routine at halftime as planned," Jennifer said, cupping her hands like a megaphone. Simmons made a sharp turn onto Canyon Road, causing Jennifer to topple back into her seat. She pushed herself back up, flashing the driver an annoyed look, which, of course, he didn't see. "If the storm doesn't blow over," Jennifer continued. "Oh no!" Corky cried. "The fire batons!" All eyes turned to the back of the bus. A flash of lightning seemed to outline Corky and her sister. "We have to turn around," Corky declared, shouting over the clap of thunder. "What?" Jennifer called, her face filled with confusion. "We have to stop at my house," Corky explained. "The fire batons. Bobby and I brought them home to practice. We forgot them. Can we turn around?" Several girls groaned, Kimmy the loudest of all. "It's only a small detour," Bobby said, coming to her sister's defense. "No problem," Jennifer said, her expression troubled. Standing in the aisle beside Simmons, she tapped him hard on the shoulder. No reaction. So she tugged his ponytail. "We have to make a stop on Fear Street," Jennifer told him. "Huh?" "Fear Street," Jennifer repeated impatiently. "Just turn here." Simmons turned the wheel and the bus skidded into a turn over the wet pavement. Holding onto the seat back, Jennifer turned back to Corky and Bobby. "Direct us when we get to Fear Street, okay?" The two sisters agreed, apologizing again for the detour. "Ooh, Fear Street," someone said, uttering a spooky howl. Some other girls laughed. Kimmy made some kind of wisecrack to Deborah, and the two girls giggled together. The rain fell in heavy sheets, driven by unpredictable, powerful wind gusts. For some reason, Simmons sped up. In front of him, the big wipers swam mechanically across the steamy windshield. Jennifer resumed her position in the aisle beside him. "I have just a few more announcements to make," she shouted. Staring out the window at the storm, Bobby saw the passing houses and trees grow darker, as if a heavy shadow had lowered itself over them, over the whole world. Trees bent in the strong wind. The rain suddenly shifted and blew against the window, startling Bobby and blocking her view. Up at the front, Jennifer continued her announcements. Bobby couldn't hear her over the pounding rain, the thunder, the angry rush of wind. Suddenly, Simmons reached out and pulled the lever to open the door. The sound of the rain grew louder. Cold, wet air cut through the bus. "Why did he open the door?" Corky asked her sister. "I guess to see better," Bobby replied thoughtfully. "The windshield's totally steamed." "Are we near home?" The bus sped up. Simmons had his head turned to the open door, his eyes on the cross street, which passed by in a gray blur. Bobby stared hard out the rain-blotted window, trying to read a street sign. Suddenly, she realized that something was wrong. The bus, it began to skid. There was no time to scream or cry out a warning. 1 second they were moving along through the rain. The next second they were sliding out of control toward the curb. "Whoa!" Simmons shrieked over the squeal of tires. "The brakes!" The tire squeals grew to a roar in Bobby's ears. She covered them with both hands. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. The impact was fast and hard. What did they hit? A tree? A rock? A curb? The bus seemed to bounce, to fly up off the road, to bounce again.
Staring in horror and surprise at the front, Bobby saw Jennifer's eyes open wide. And then, as the bus jolted and spun, she watched as Jennifer flew out the open door. Jennifer's startled scream was drowned out by the squeal of the skidding tires, by the crunch of metal, by the shatter of glass.
Chapter 5. Death of a Cheerleader. It all took a second, maybe less. Bobby blinked, and it was over. The screams swirled around her, surrounding her. She wasn't sure whether she was hearing the squeal of the tires or the cries of the cheerleaders. And then the world tilted on its side. With a silent, choked gasp, Bobby toppled onto Corky, and the two of them, arms flailing helplessly, fell sideways towards the far window, which was now the floor. No time to scream. It took only a microsecond, or so it seemed. The window glass beneath them cracked all the way down the pane like a jagged bolt of lightning. And still the bus bumped and slid, metal grating against pavement, invading their ears. Bobby felt another hard bump. A stab of pain jolted her entire body, made her shake and bounce, and then all movement stopped. Such an abrupt stop. Such a shattering stop. I'm okay, Bobby realized. Her first clear thought. She was on top of her sister, their arms and legs tangled. Corky's okay too. Corky stared up at her, open-mouthed, her green eyes wide with fear. All sideways. She heard muffled cries, whimpers like frightened puppies. Oh man! A loud groan from the front of the bus. From Simmons. Bobby pulled herself up. Simmons was trying to stand, but everything was tilted. Everything was wrong. Are you okay? Corky asked in a tiny voice. Yeah, I think so, Bobby replied uncertainly. Then get off me, Corky cried. She sounded so angry. It made Bobby laugh. Hysterical laughter, she realized, and forced herself to stop. Got to keep control. Bobby looked up to find a row of windows above her head. Oh, she said out loud. She finally realized what had happened. The bus was on its side. It had rammed into a tree or something, bounced off, and toppled onto its side, then skidded to a stop. How do we get out? She heard Kimmy call, even though she couldn't see her. In the darkness, she saw a tangle of arms and legs. She heard a girl crying. She heard groans and whispers. The emergency door and back! Someone shouted. Bobby reached for the emergency door and tried pushing it open. It was stuck. The windows are faster! Someone else cried. Kimmy stood up, raised both arms high, struggled to slide one of the windows open. Bobby, balancing uneasily, tried to do the same. Can't you get off me? Corky asked impatiently. I'm trying, okay? Bobby replied, not recognizing her own tight, shrill voice. The windows slid open. Raindrops hit Bobby's upturned face. Cold, fresh, so clean. Is anyone hurt? Simmons was calling, a tall shadow in the front. Is anyone hurt? Who's crying? Bobby raised her voice, grabbed hold of the window frame. Is anyone hurt? The rain was just a drizzle now. The rumble of thunder was low and far in the distance. Bobby pulled herself halfway out of the bus. The whole world was shimmering, glistening wet, fresh and clean. The bus tires were still spinning. Where are we? Bobby wondered. It all looked so familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Another face appeared. Deborah was emerging from a window closer to the front. Are you okay? She called, squinting at Bobby as if she were far away. I think so, Bobby replied. You? Yeah, my wrist. I think it's sprained, that's all. They pulled themselves out, smiled at each other, buoyed by the fresh air, the cool wetness of being alive. Then Standing on the overturned side that was now the roof, they leaned down into the windows to help other girls escape. Time seemed to stand still. Corky joined her sister, slid to the ground, stretched and yawned as if emerging from a long sleep. The bus headlights, one on top of the other, cut through the air, casting twin spotlights on the jagged tombstones poking up through tall weeds. Tombstones? Weeds? Bobby lowered herself to the ground, her sneakers sinking into the wet grass. Gripping Corky's ice-cold hand, she turned back towards the street. Behind them, a tilted street sign read, Fear Street. Oh, she let go of Corky's hand. Look. The bus had careened off the road and slid over the grass of the Fear Street Cemetery. A thick yellow mist, catching the light from the headlights, lingering between the old gravestones, which rose up like arms and legs from the twisting, bending weeds. We're in the cemetery, Corky said, her voice a whisper, her expression stunned. How? We're only a block from home, Bobby said. Is everyone out? Simmons called. He came toward them, taking long strides, his jeans stained at the knees, a bandana wrapped tightly around a bleeding cut on his arm. You okay? He asked the two sisters. Yeah, Bobby told him. Everyone got out, Simmons said. No one's hurt too bad. Then Bobby and Corky cried out at the same time, Jennifer! Where was Jennifer? In the horror of the crash, in the noise and tilting darkness of it, they had forgotten about her. Jennifer, Bobby saw her again, saw her arms jerk up as she flew out the open bus door, almost as if being pulled out. Jennifer, Corky began calling, cupping her hands over her mouth. Has anyone seen Jennifer? Jennifer? Jennifer. The word buzzed through the group of dazed, frightened girls as they huddled together, squinting against the bright headlights, trying to turn things right side up in their minds, trying to make sense of everything, trying to convince themselves that they were okay, that everything was going to be fine. Jennifer! Jennifer! And then Corky saw her. From behind. Saw her body sprawled face down, her head resting on the earth in front of an old tombstone, her arms stretched above her head as if she were hugging the stone. Jennifer! Bobby shouted. A sudden gust of wind made Jennifer's skirt ruffle, but Jennifer didn't look up, didn't raise her head. Corky and Bobby reached her before the others. Bobby grabbed her shoulders and rolled her onto her back. Don't move her! Someone yelled. Don't touch her! It isn't safe! Bobby looked up to see Simmons standing beside her, staring down at Jennifer sprawled so awkwardly across the old gravesite. Let's carefully roll her over and get her face out of the mud, he said quietly. They tugged her gently by the shoulders. As they turned Jennifer over, the words etched on the old grave marker came into Bobby's view. Stine Fear. The dates beneath the name had been worn away nearly beyond recognition. 1875 to 1899. They laid Jennifer gently onto her back. Call an ambulance! Heather was screaming. Somebody call for help! Bobby leaned over Jennifer's unmoving form. It's too late, she said, choking out the words. She's dead. Chapter 6. It's all your fault! No! Corky's anguished cry cut through the air. She dropped to the wet ground beside Jennifer and grabbed her pale, limp hand. No! At first, Bobby thought the low wail she was hearing came from her sister. But as the sound grew louder, cutting through the crackle and whisper of the wind, bending the ancient trees of the cemetery, Bobby realized it was the siren of an ambulance. Someone in one of the houses across the street must have seen the accident and called for help. A few seconds later, 3 ambulances and a police cruiser pulled onto the wet grass, their flashing red lights washing over everyone and making everything seem too bright, the colors all wrong, too frightening, too vivid to be real. The white coats of the paramedics, scrambling through the wet weeds, flashed red and gray. The light caught their hand, expressing, like those in artificial light snapshots, freezing them in Bobby's mind. She knew she'd always remember every somber face, every flash of light, every second of this dark, wet nightmare. Behind the tilted tombstone, Ronnie stood crying, sobbing loudly, her mouth open wide, her eyes round. Kimmy and Deborah huddled around her, trying to comfort her, their faces distorted by the flickers of red light too. The rain had stopped now, leaving the air heavy and cold. On the ground, in front of the tombstone, several paramedics worked over Jennifer, speaking softly among themselves, softly but urgently. Gentle hands pulled Bobby and her sister back. 2 young police officers were questioning Simmons, who was shrugging and gesturing to the overturned bus. He appeared very frightened and upset. Radios crackled from the ambulances and the police car. A paramedic leaning over Jennifer spoke rapidly into a cellular telephone. The wind blew a shower of ice-cold rainwater down from the trees. Bobby took a reluctant step closer. Was Jennifer alive? Were they bringing her around? She had to see. The white coats had formed a protective circle around Jennifer. Bobby tried to make sense out of the buzz of low voices. She made her way to just outside the circle, her sneakers sinking into the soft earth. One of the paramedics stood up. In a blink of red light, Bobby saw his eyes close, his teeth clench. "She's gone," he said. Another white-coated young man climbed to his feet, shaking his head. "Gone." Radios crackled. Ronnie's sobs cut through the air. "No!" Bobby screamed. Without realizing it, without even realizing she was moving, Bobby pushed past the grim-faced paramedics. She knelt at Jennifer's side, stared down at her pretty, expressionless face. And Jennifer opened her eyes. "Hey!" Bobby cried. "Whoa!" Jennifer blinked and stared up at Bobby. "Hey!" Bobby called. "Hey!" Jennifer blinked again. Her lips trembled. Her dark eyes moved from side to side. "Hey! She's alive!" Bobby called. "Hey!" Corky was holding on to Bobby's shoulders, leaning over her, staring down at Jennifer. Jennifer smiled up at them both. "Hey!" Cheers and cries, urgent voices, the crackling of the radios, a low voice speaking rapidly into a cellular phone. The sounds were drowned out by a rush of wind. It started to rain again. Bobby stared at the flashing colors, the darting yellow cones of light from the flashlights, the pale beams of headlights. The lights all melted into one and grew brighter and brighter until she had to close her eyes. Jennifer was alive. Okay. She was going to be okay. Her eyes still shut tightly, Bobby said a silent prayer. When she opened her eyes, Jennifer's gurney was being gently slid into an ambulance. 2 more squad cars had pulled up. Several officers stood outlined in headlights, inspecting the overturned bus, shaking their heads. "Lucky no one was killed." The words floated through the air and repeated in Bobby's mind. The rain came down harder, swirled by the wind. The ambulance siren started with a cough, then a shrill wail corkscrewed through the rustling trees. The ambulance roared away. "How will we get home?" Ronnie was asking, still flanked by Kimmy and Deborah. "What about the game?" Heather asked. "We have to get home," Ronnie insisted. "Will Jennifer be okay?" "Has anyone called our parents?" "Someone should call Miss Green." "She's probably at the game." "They won't play in this rain." Let it rain, Bobby thought, raising her face to it. Let the rain wash everything away. Everything. She turned, startled to see Kimmy standing beside her, a cold, grim expression on her face. Her eyes locked on Bobby's. "Kimmy?" Bobby started. "This is all your fault," Kimmy said, speaking through clenched teeth. Her hands were balled into tight fists at her sides. The rain had matted her black hair against her forehead. Huh? It's all your fault, Kimmy repeated, continuing to glare at Bobby. If you hadn't made us turn onto Fear Street... Now, wait a minute, Bobby cried. That isn't fair. She realized the other cheerleaders were all staring at her, their faces grim and unhappy, lit by the flashes of red light. Kimmy, that's not fair, Corky cried, rushing forward to join her sister. Kimmy walked quickly back to Ronnie and Deborah. That's not fair, Corky repeated. The rain fell harder, making it difficult to see. The ambulance carrying Jennifer was far in the distance now, its siren a lingering cry that refused to fade away.